Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mary Lou Harrigan and delighted to welcome you to this afternoon session. This happens to be the last of our fall series, and we have an exciting array of speakers for you today. I know that you will enjoy them. It's going to be both informative and engaging, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing them myself. This time of COVID has been a time for us to experiment with these virtual programs, and we have certainly appreciated the opportunity to come together with you in this way. I would now like to invite and introduce Mr. Mark Blanford, who is the new Vice President at Providence Healthcare of Seniors Care. So I would like to pass it over to him. He has made a recording for us. Over to Mark.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Mark Blanford. I'm the Vice President of Seniors Care Clinical and Operations at Providence Healthcare here in Vancouver. I'm glad to welcome you to this afternoon's session, Dialogue on Aging Public Presentation Series. And it's my regret that I can't be with you today to enjoy the conversation and to engage in it with you. Unfortunately, I'm here in Vancouver dealing with some COVID-related operational issues in some of our facilities, and I'm going to be distracted with that for a little while. But regardless, I'm very happy to welcome you to Providence Healthcare's virtual dialogue on aging, and this the final session in the fall 2020 series. I know last month you had a great speaker, my colleague Barbara Lindsay from the Alzheimer's Society, and hopefully today you'll have just as much of interest to each of you. So my greetings to each of you for joining us from across British Columbia today. We are very pleased as Providence Healthcare to be able to create these virtual learning connections, and I hope that until we can meet again in person, these sessions will meet your needs. Topics include ones that you've already told us that they're especially relevant to you at this time of COVID-19, and hopefully we'll have some interesting dialogues in the future as we go forward. For many years, the Dialogue on Aging public presentation series has brought together researchers, clinicians and other experts for engaging discussions with community seniors on a wide range of topics. We hope to continue this and we hope to highlight initiatives in the community. Our session today continues to meet these goals, we hope, including a discussion on the importance of sleep during COVID-19, something that many of us working in the field are having difficulty getting these days. But I know that we feel very strongly that the work we're doing right now is very important in maintaining the health of the community and particularly vulnerable seniors. So we continue to enjoy doing that. So today I hope you'll have a good session. It'll be my pleasure to join you again in the future. And for today, have a good session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I would like to warmly welcome Barb Lindsay, who is going to moderate the session for us this afternoon. And also very much welcome Barb and the Alzheimer's Society, having been a partner in this series with us. So thank you, Barb.
Hi, Mary Lou. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Mary Lou, for introducing me, but also to give us this opportunity for the Alzheimer's Society to be involved with you. We're so thankful to Providence Health for hosting the series and for providing the incredibly interesting and engaging researchers like today's speakers. It's such an opportunity to learn about their work and to actually be able to ask questions. So there's about 70,000 people with dementia in the province, and you can imagine if you think of their families, their friends, that number is even bigger about the number of people who are impacted by dementia in BC. And that's why at the Society, the Alzheimer's Society of BC, our vision is a world without Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And that world begins with a province where people affected by dementia are acknowledged, supported, and included, a truly dementia-friendly British Columbia. And to make that vision a reality, here's what we want to do. We want to change the conversation about dementia through awareness and through awareness campaigns. We want people to start to think about people with dementia, less with the stigma that comes along with that, but more reminding us all that they're people and they're people first. And we want to change the experience for people on the dementia journey through the programs and services that we offer through First Link Dementia Support. We also wanted to change the practice of healthcare providers and other people who work with people living with dementia through education and outreach and involvement with our programs. We want to change policy too by amplifying the voices of advocates who have lived with the experience of dementia, and by fostering relationships with government, we want to make a change. And the biggest thing is we want to change the future so that that people in the future are not going to have dementia, or that we're going to know how to care for them properly. And that really comes through research. So the research is the future, and that's why it's exciting today for us to be speaking to researchers. So today is a great opportunity for us to meet these researchers, and including connecting with them and all of you. So we're really excited to have you here. And so thank you so much for joining us today. I want to also thank Wavefront Center for Communication Accessibility to help us make this event more accessible. And thank you so much for all our interpreters today. So before we hear from our speakers today, I wanted to introduce another member of our team. I think we'll be meeting her later, Avery Milne, who is our Provincial Coordinator for Knowledge Mobilization. So I'm going to turn it over to Avery.
Thanks so much.
Avery.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barbara. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you all again, and I hope that everyone is keeping well. I know that these can be difficult times. So I've come back here today. I've brought the wheel back so that we can have one more go and play some more trivia. So the questions that I've prepared this time are a review of the previous speakers that we've had during these fall sessions, so those last two sessions, so that we can reflect on what we've learned so far. I have some prizes to give away that will be mailed to you afterwards, depending on when I can get into the office. So be patient with me. It'll be a nice surprise in your mailbox. And I'm going to provide a prize for everyone who participates. So whether you get it right or wrong, it's all about just having fun, reflecting on what we've learned so far during this session. So with that said, are there any volunteers to kick us off and participate?
Hi,
Hi,
so
Kelly.
hi, Avery.
Hi.
I actually didn't attend, but I'll answer anyway.
Okay, we have some multiple choice, so you can always play luck of the draw. Okay,
Great.
Here we go. Okay, oh, number 2. Okay, let me see your question. Okay, so this one is a true or false. So in the first session of our fall series, we had the speaker, Dr. Alex Henri Bargava. He talked about the link between exercise and brain health. So true or false, he said that even small levels of exercise can benefit our brain health.
True.
True, yes. So he mentioned that even incorporating small movement breaks where we just stand up and stretch, you know, if you're watching TV, you can put the remote on a different piece of furniture to encourage you to get up. So any amount of exercise is beneficial. It doesn't have to be a huge routine right away. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Georgina.
Hi.
Hello. Okay. Shall I spin the wheel for you?
Yeah.
Let's go. Okay, we landed on 11.
Oh.
All right. So in our last session, we had Dr. Paul Blackburn. He was part of a nonprofit initiative, and their goal is to share the science of brain health and resilience and help people work on achievable goals. So the question is, what was the name of the nonprofit initiative? So was it A, Healthy Brains Wellness, B, Fountain of Health, or C, Health is Wealth?
Health is wealth.
So it was actually B, Fountain of Health, but I liked the third name too. I just came up with that one. So if you go to their website, the Fountain of Health, they have 5 key actions that we can take to improve our brain health and wellness, including positive thinking, social activity, physical activity, brain challenge, and looking after our mental health. And they have a tool on their website called the Wellness app where they encourage you to set and achieve small doable goals to improve your health. So that's Fountain of Health. Thank you so much. You'll still get a prize because you're a great sport.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, I'm gonna give it a spin for you. Okay, looks like it is number 6. I'm gonna check your question. Okay. So in the first presentation by Dr. Lynn Beatty, she opened her presentation by playing a song called Both Sides Now at the beginning of her presentation. Who was the artist of the song that she played? Was it A, Sheryl Crow, B, The Beatles, or C, Joni Mitchell?
Joni Mitchell.
Correct, yes. I thought it was really neat that she incorporated music into her presentation and it made it memorable to me. So you got it right. Thanks for playing along.
Thank you.
No worries.
All right, and I do have another volunteer, Doris.
All right, number 7. Okay. So should I just say the question, Christine?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we had Cindy Bouvet present on an intergenerational choir. It brought together people living with dementia, their care partners, and high school students. So my question is, what was the name of the choir? Was it A, the Sweet Singers, B, the Noteworthy Singers, or C, the Intergenerational Choir? And I'm happy to repeat the options if needed.
And Doris says C.
So it was actually B, the Noteworthy Singers. But I think C would be a great option too, because it is an intergenerational choir. And it was great to hear about. Cindy mentioned that there were some really positive outcomes for everyone involved in the initiative. So participants said that they experienced joy, they made new friends, and they built a strong sense of belonging. So I thought that that was a really lovely presentation and a really great initiative to hear about. So thank you so much for participating, and you'll still get a prize. I appreciate you.
Well, thanks so much, Avery. Now we're going to introduce our next speaker, and that's our guest speaker today, and her name is Dr. Katherine Paton. So Dr. Paton graduated from medical school at the University of Western Ontario, and she trained in ophthalmology at UBC. She's a clinical professor at the UBC Department of Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences, and she teaches medical students, residents, fellows, and she serves patients both in comprehensive ophthalmology and ocular oncology. Dr. Paton has a keen interest in ethics and social justice, medical administration and governance, and she served on health boards, on the board of the BCMA, as president of the Vancouver Hospital Medical Staff and the Vancouver Medical Association, and as the executive associate dean of clinical and community at the Faculty of Medicine. Dr. Paton's work has been recognized by awards from her profession and from the community. She's also a member of the Alzheimer's Society's own Ascent for Alzheimer's team, and that was a few years ago. Her practice has shown many examples of how people age and includes at least 10 people over age 100 years old, and many more than that who are in some form of residential care or assisted living. She thinks that humor, physical activity, social interaction, and spirituality are the key to adaptability and healthy living. We're really excited to have you here today, Dr. Paton. And you're going to be presenting on climbing your own Kilimanjaro, lessons from life in motion. Afterwards, we'll have a brief question and answer. So if you have any questions, please hit raise your hand button or leave a question in the chat box. Dr. Paton, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, it's my great pleasure. It's actually both an honor and humbling to be here for this group. I'm not sure if people can see, but out my window, it's snowing. Yes, this is the West Coast. So I am delighted to be asked by my good friend Mary Lou, who always knows how to get me into a little more trouble than I can handle. And she asked if I would just talk about life lessons from climbing Kilimanjaro. And when we were discussing this, the pandemic had already started, and the notions of change and what was going on had already happened. My own climb of Kilimanjaro happened a while ago, but lessons in life are a little bit like that. You come back to them over and over again. So this is not a didactic session about how to age well, and I suspect that you both in your own lives and from your questions will be teaching us more than we're teaching you. So what is Mount Kilimanjaro? It happens to be the tallest freestanding mountain in Africa. They sometimes call it the roof of Africa, and it's really the stuff of dreams. It's an unusual mountain because it's out there in the middle of nowhere and everything around it is flat. It was first scaled in 1889, and it actually has a series of peaks as you go up it. One of them is permanently closed because it's really not very safe to climb that route, but there are 8 routes in total, and it has permanent glaciers, and yes, this is in Africa. Ururu is the highest point, and the youngest point is a place called Mount Kibo, but it actually has sort of a dual summit, and most people make it to Mawenzi first, and then they forge on to the top. So what you might ask is a nice girl who sits in an office hunched over a microscope most of the time doing climbing Kilimanjaro. Well, yes, there were lessons. Let's talk about the lessons first. And then you can come back at the end and ask if I actually talked about them. I think the biggest lessons we took away from the climb of Mount Kilimanjaro, and I did it with my husband, a good friend, and a team, was have a passion, be committed to doing something, and dream big. All 3 of those fit together for me. The idea that I personally would be able to walk up Kilimanjaro was actually a little bit of either a laugh or a nightmare. I read the books. There were people who had tried and couldn't. What did I think I was doing? Have a timeline. A little pressure is always helpful to get you going. Know what it needs to be done. One of the best lessons is one that I think we learn over and over again in life. Help is invaluable. Take it when it's offered. The kind of help you get might be surprising. Another favorite lesson was prepare, prepare, prepare. Break your boots in, make sure you can walk far enough, make sure you've prepared your team so that you can handle adversity at altitude when everybody's a bit cranky. Remember that others are with you on your journey. You are not alone. And that is so true all the time in life, even when we think we are by ourselves in our own little stew with terrible things happening and nobody quite understands. The reality is there are others with you. More lessons. Things can change at altitude. You could substitute age for altitude here. Some gear is just useless extra weight. You're carrying more than you need to. You're carrying ideas, old notions, old frameworks, old hurts. That extra stuff is extra baggage, and you won't climb well if you're carrying extra. Another great lesson, dirt won't kill you. Now, maybe in an operating room, that's not a good lesson to learn, but on the mountain, dirt was definitely there, and by the end of the week, we looked like people we wouldn't have recognized. It definitely feels great to reach the goal and to celebrate it. You had be well advised to keep your sense of humor. Include others, including people you don't know well or people you don't know at all. You may get a really lovely surprise. Expose yourself. to failure, to new challenges, to a little humiliation, maybe even to humor. Dare to ask. I think in life we often get to the stage where we figure we're too old to ask. We're supposed to be in charge. We're too knowledgeable to ask. We'll be embarrassed if we ask. We're supposed to know why ask. The pandemic has made us ask lots. And I think the most impressive thing is that you were all here on an electronic digital media learning how to get here. And I bet you didn't get here without asking how to hook up, how to get it started, what to do. Learn something new. That might go for the digital things too. But in our case, it was learning a little bit of Swahili, learning how to sing another song, and learning how to stay warm at night. So why did I go up Kilimanjaro, and who went with me? Well, it was actually with the Ascent for Alzheimer's. And anybody in BC could go. The Ascent is no longer conducted, but it was a wonderful fundraising initiative. You had to raise $10,000 plus the cost of your trip, and you had to participate in preparations. So the who turned out to be us. Jeff and I went up Kilimanjaro. Why? For the Alzheimer's Society. And who gets Alzheimer's? These numbers are a tiny bit sobering, and I keep reminding my colleagues in medicine that 1 in 4 over age 85, or 25% of people over 85, have Alzheimer's. I'm going to show you examples both of people with Alzheimer's and people who are over 85 and don't have it, but the numbers go up as we age. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who your parents were, what you did for a job, how nice your home is, how humble your origins are. It just happens. And if you think of the numbers, by 2030, there'll be 750,000 in Canada. It is not normal aging. And the most important who was my dad. My dad developed Alzheimer's in his probably late 60s, early 70s. And the first to notice was my mother, who just thought he was getting lazy. But in fact, she was right. There were errors being made. So what did we do? We went up Kilimanjaro. That's what Kilimanjaro looks like. And as part of the fundraising, we had to figure out how to keep people informed. My little card for doing that was the one on the left. I liked the digital format and the picture. My husband liked giving people a list of things to do. And the slide on the bottom is a group of people where we work out normally, helping us do some fundraising. The most important thing was just decide you were going to do it and get moving. There were 15 years worth of ascents for Alzheimer's, and it was a big financial generating machine for the Alzheimer's Society. I think you probably all know something about Alzheimer's from the talks that have gone on here before, and I'm not going to belabor that. But from the bottom, this is what Kilimanjaro really looks like. And I looked at the top and I looked at the snow and I wondered what on earth I had done saying I was going to climb it. Why would you do it? Because it was personally motivating. My father had passed away. I wanted some way of actually processing this for myself. I wanted to see what it was like to be active in the face of a challenge rather than to sitting. And this actually comes back to the subtitle of a life lessons from a life in motion. You really needed to keep going. I couldn't just stop in the middle of my own life or my own goals. The Alzheimer's showed up when it did. And then I couldn't just take out 6 months to go prepare for Alzheimer's climb or ascent. I had to do it while I was doing everything else. Where? Here you can see really halfway down the map of Africa is where the Kilimanjaro sign shows up. But on our way there, as we flew from Amsterdam, I kept passing places on the map, and that's why the second map is there. Mogadishu, Entebbe, Kigali, Mombasa, many of the places we've heard about in the news, places that seem so far away, places that are close to Kilimanjaro. And then we did this in the fall of 2012 at the time of a full moon. Why did we do it then? Partly because our hips and knees were still working. We thought it was a good time to go, just in case we couldn't go later. The reality of when for Alzheimer's is that it often shows up in the 60s to the 90s. There may be a little bit of lingering change before it happens. And just when you get to retirement and the golden years, just when your partner is getting old along with you and you're both running out of steam, Alzheimer's shows up. So this is the team that I hiked with, and we're sitting on the Wenzi shoulder, part way up the ascent. By this time, we've got our sort of sea legs, if you like. We've gotten used to walking on scrabbly ground. We've gotten used to supporting each other, walking slowly, wearing our sun protection. And we're wanting to see if we can scale the rocks to make sure we can do the next part. There we are as a group, all sitting. And of course, the guides are standing off to the left, looking like it's nothing special, because this is where they do it all the time. But we thought we were pretty special. And in fact, our group was a bit special. The person sitting in the middle in the front with the lovely red hat is my friend Esther. And you will see more pictures about Esther, but Esther and Martin made our climb very special. At the time we did this, Martin was 85 and Esther was 84, and they both got to the top. This is the night we did the last part, because in fact, to climb to the very top, you hike at nighttime. At the bottom are Martin and Esther in their parkas. Please note these wonderful stuffed, warm-looking orange parkas. Before the time when they were available commercially, before the time when they had designer names on them, Esther sewed down-filled jackets for both of them because they were mountaineers from a very early age. They started hiking in their 20s. She gave him nylon rope as a wedding present and then saved him with it about 6 months later. And they had gear that would go on forever. So they were prepared. There we are, starting out, headlights on, people trying to climb late at night. This is what we could see when we were climbing, and not a lot of anything else. It was a long way up. It was dark. It seemed to go on forever. It seemed like when you picked your feet up, you weren't getting very far. Well, how do you climb the mountain? You let other people show you. And these are actually all the ways to go. But the most important thing were our guides, our team who took us step by step up the mountain, showed us how to camp and where to camp, knew how to avoid dangers. And then en route, you will see us on the right-hand side. There are our guides and guides from another group celebrating. We never did figure out quite exactly what they were celebrating, but they were dancing up a storm halfway up the mountain. On the left-hand side is my husband, Jeff, and our friend, and we took to calling them Mutt and Jeff, but it's really Mike and Jeff, the two musketeers who kept everybody smiling. There's our group again, Esther right in the middle. And in fact, you may have seen something about this because it was in publicity. Martin and Esther adapted to a new reality and became media darlings. Now, fast forward, this is actually a couple of years ago. Esther reached 90, a year after Martin, of course, and is still celebrating. So to me, this was a great example of what was a life in motion really about. How did you stay vital? How do you stay walking, talking, interested, learning things? And she's just an absolutely fabulous example. Part of that is by staying interested, staying involved, keeping track of other people. Part of it was by being determined. So what did I learn from this? I, who had not climbed mountains before, have ended up climbing other mountains, including local ones, with a hard hat. You can see in the bottom picture where we were scaling up, and at the top pictures we're standing on the top of that peak. I don't think I ever imagined I'd be walking up hills like that. I'd like to shift gears for a moment and talk about resilience, because in fact, I think resilience is one of the things that allows us to do this. Now, in my world, an academic world, people come up with terms and then they spend a lifetime studying them. So I would like to remind you that there are two ways of using words. Cool might mean really cold, or cool might mean like the fellows next to them. Joe Cool. In this case, resilience to me has had a long history, but as an academic term and as the sort of thing we're talking about now, resilience is about 35 or 40 years old. It started being written up in the 1970s, and now, especially with reference to the pandemic, you hear about people talking about resilience all the time. So I wanted to know exactly what somebody thought academically about resilience. And I'll read you part of what's in an article. Modern resilience studies originated among psychologists and psychiatrists. Researchers interested in psychological and social determinants of health picked up the concept and have gradually extended its use from the domain of mental health to health in general. Early work was concerned with the individual, but more recently, researchers have become interested in a feature of whole communities. And then there's a whole lot of variability and conceptualization about it. But I like the idea that people have looked at it being all the way from something innate, something you train in a young person, to something that you cultivate and renew over a lifetime, to something that we actually practice in communities. And they actually listed several different ways of being resilient or having a protective mechanism. Constitutional resilience, which is sort of having a positive temperament, and sociability, being responsive to others, intelligence, trying to figure out, plan, and make decisions, communication skills, personal attributes like self-efficacy, self-esteem, tolerance for the negative, internal sense of control, sense of humor, hopefulness, an enduring set of values, and a balanced perspective. They talked about resilience at a family level, supportive families who were cohesive, who are non-blaming, who provide warmth, encouragement, and assistance, and socioeconomic things that actually allow you to develop these, but it doesn't have to be much. The next level up was the community level. And I think this talk and the system of having these talks and being able to join with each other on Zoom is a lovely example of community resilience. School experiences with supportive peers and teachers, academic success, supportive communities that believe in the individual and allow the individual to flourish, communities that are non-punitive, communities that provide resources to assist others in society and to assist those who are in need and can't help themselves. And then cultural resources, those that are founded in the spirituality, the traditional languages, and the healing concepts that are part of your community. So all of those things, I think, foster resilience and help us with this really essential characteristic. One of the things that helped me with resilience was exercise. And I didn't really start a formal program until I was in my 40s, but it's something I try to do every day. The one on the left was when I was preparing in 2012 to go up Kilimanjaro. The one on the right was this morning's workout session. Not only are they resilient, they're actually a bit adaptive. My workout sessions are on Zoom now. But you need to stay physically fit and active. There has to be the body, mind, spirit part of staying resilient. I'd like to give you some examples of people who are teaching me about these concepts over and over again, because I don't think any of it is terribly new to you. And in fact, if you've passed about 45, you probably have a toolbox of ideas, of ways that you keep yourself active, resilient, and adaptable. The lovely gentleman here who comes with his son is now walking with a cane, only that's just happened in the last couple of years. The picture on the right is a scroll he brought me. And I felt so honored that he would even have in his mind to do a thing like that. It's a beautiful piece. He's had it inscribed, and it hangs on the wall in my office to remind me of the patients. I haven't done anything particular for him that would be out of the ordinary. But Mr. Chu is extremely grateful when he comes, interested, and he's 103. The idea that he's walking on his own down the hallway here with his cane, his son in the background, and his son has only shown up in the last 2 years or so. Up until then, Mr. Chu always came to visit me on his own. Tells me something about his independence, his desire to stay engaged, and his activity level. Both of these people, and everyone who's in my pictures has given me permission to take their picture and to share them with you, are people that I see in my oncology practice. The lovely lady on the left came to me each week during the pandemic because I had to inject a kind of chemotherapy in her eye. I'm sure she didn't have it on her list of things to do to have lymphoma in her eye, but that's what she had. She showed up every week. She had a smile on. Sometimes they came with lemon buns, and we got all the way through all of her treatment, and she got to go home and visit friends in Italy. The lady on the right is another example, and if you look closely, you might see she's got beautiful purple hair. And the shield and patch that she's got on, somebody painted to look like peacock feathers. And she actually even has a scarf that matches. She just figured if things were going to be like this, she was going to dress it up. And with that sense of adapting to the new thing and making something of it rather than hiding and being uncomfortable, she has overcome her diversity. Now, you might remember that I said something about a sense of humor earlier. Well, here are examples of a patient who has done that. You can tell that she's got a patch on her eye. She was reading a book, and I asked her if she would hold it up so that I could take a photo, because the title of the book was The Girl Who Takes an Eye for an Eye. That's one of the series of mystery type stories, but nonetheless, she could see the humor in that with her patch on. My cartoon was to remind me to remind you, and I suspect you know the story already. The princess is asking to be saved. There is a knight in shining armor about to slay the dragon. It's not the knight in shining armor who saves her, it's the dragon. Sometimes things come from out of left field, and you should never be too sure what's going to happen. The patient on the right told me about an absolutely spectacular place called Iguazu Falls. She loved to travel. And in the Iguazu Falls, which are bigger, I think, than the Niagara Falls, there are spectacular birds and butterflies, and it's just an incredible place to see. And because she talked about it, I eventually got to go. And she showed up in my office one day and said, I would like to show you my new Porsche, my new red Porsche. If you look closely off her right elbow, there is the best looking walker I have ever seen. It comes out like a triangle, and it is candy apple red. And that new red Porsche was her way of adapting to assistance. The other form of red Porsche on the right-hand side is my mom, who ended up needing a little assistance getting around. And I'm sure driving her little red Porsche was not something she had on her list of things to do either. We talked about finding your motivation. I bring you this example from our recent news about the pandemic. This 99-year-old gentleman, Canadian, walked 100 kilometers for the COVID fight, raising funds. I'm sure he didn't think he was going to walk 100 kilometers, but he just got started, one foot in front of another. People were supportive, and before he knew it, having the motivation and sharing it meant that he was encouraged, and he kept going, and he made his goal. One of the other things about taking on anything in life, whether it's climbing Kilimanjaro or actually getting down the street to the mailbox because your arthritis is bothering you so bad, is to be in the moment. I loved the calendar note on the left-hand side. You never know what you have until it's gone. Toilet paper, for instance. And in fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, we realized how much that matters to people. The one on the right side says, if you get tired, learn to rest, not quit. So what do we need? Resilience, adaptability, tolerance for unpredictability, and acceptance of being what we're currently calling in the new normal. But that's really just acceptance of change, because change certainly happens. And with that, I'd like to suggest that these lessons are probably ones you all have too, and I would love to hear a little conversation from the audience. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paton. I'm so glad that Mary Lou was able to convince you to join us today. That was a really inspirational talk. I also met Esther one time, and I love the fact that you told the story about her wedding present to her husband, and then how it helped them so much later on. Thank you so much for that. I think that was so inspiring. So we do have time for a few questions. So Christine is going to help with your, if you write your question in the chat box, and that would be the most helpful.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Dr. Paton. That was excellent. Thank you for your presentation. I like how you sort of addressed resiliency, adaptability, tolerance, and acceptance. Along that line of sort of like aging well and aging, you did talk about physical fitness as well. My question is what do you feel that people need to do to age well, leading up to, as we get into the more senior ages? I work with different adults, and I focus on aging adults, specifically working with healthy aging, but with focused on yoga. And so I've done extensive research in this area, and my question kind of relates to the healthy aging aspect, but I also noticed that there's a lot of younger people now that aren't aging as well as, I guess, the seniors now, I guess you could say. And what would you?
So I think you've made a few really wonderful points. And my first comment would be, I'd be very surprised after the pandemic if we don't see a change in what people think and value. Lots of people are talking about being cooped up at home and trying to figure out ways of staying healthy in the mind, body, spirit, holistic sense of staying healthy. I can't say that I've ever seen so many resources or so much concentration on it. And so even all from the medical officer of health suggestions that people get out and walk, people are at least aware of it, aware that sitting all day is difficult.
Right.
Personally, I was somewhat active as a young person, but then I went to school and I spent my time studying, and I work in an office where I'm in a chair and my neck's in a terrible position. And it's just a part of the working environment. And so personally, I started probably in my early 40s, working out 3 times a week. That sounds simple. It's not really. Trying to get there is always a challenge. And I don't think it has to be something fancy. But for me, doing it with somebody is much more effective than trying to do it on my own. And I know that people can do that in many, many different fashions. So where I go to the dentist, I have seen a group out in the parking lot undercover in winter doing Tai Chi at 7 or 7:30 in the morning. And I was just really encouraged and motivated by watching them, because I am sure nobody was under the age of 50. And I'm pretty sure that several of them were over age 80. It's that business of staying mobile, of actually moving your joints. Esther has taught me that staying active matters. And Esther and Martin are, I think, maybe this year still skiing. Certainly we're still skiing last year, and still walking. Maybe not climbing mountains quite the same way, but I think it is that business of taking into account that you may have a little discomfort and doing it anyway. And then personally for me, again, I would love to say I'm not aging, but of course we all are. And aging starts faster and earlier than you think.
Right.
And actually just staying mobile, the stretching, the moving my joints, the making sure that I can straighten up really matters. In her final years, my mother could not lift a hanger to hang her clothes up. And I found that alarming. I felt badly for her, but I was more alarmed to think that it would get to that. And it just was an example to me of how important it was to actually use it or lose it. So I think it's making it appropriate and safe and fun, and probably doing it with somebody, or making enough of a commit to do it with somebody.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question if no one else has a question.
I have a follow-up answer first. Dancing is a good way of doing it. My husband came to me shortly after my dad died and said we were going to take ballroom dancing lessons. And I was alarmed. If he had said that 25 years before, I might have thought it was romantic. And I said to him, I can't go dancing. My dad just died. And he said, yes, you can. He would want you to. And he took both of his left feet, and I took my bad attitude, and we started ballroom dancing lessons. And it's actually one of the things that has kept us mobile, kept us learning something new, engaged with the music, finding a reason to make sure we're flexible, and meeting a group of other people who are doing the same. So it doesn't just have to sound like exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll wait if anyone else has a question, but I'll ask you a question if no one else has another question. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so you can go ahead, and that will be the last question for this segment.
Okay, so you're speaking specifically to physical activity. What are your thoughts pertaining to, for relating to like the mental health and you said mind, body, spirit, and it's what would your definition be with that, or just being able to age well? because I know you kind of allude to it with, you know, speaking on resilience and adaptability and just being able to tolerate and accept things as they come up, but from a mental health standpoint.
I think there are numerous things that go into that, and it's a toolbox. And it's a toolbox with multiple things in it. And sometimes if one tool doesn't work very well, having more than one tool that you've acquired over a lifetime or that you're keeping acquiring as you age helps immensely. So for the mental health piece of it, sleep and good sleep hygiene are really important. And I know they're hard. I wouldn't have imagined 15 or 20 years ago that I'd even be talking about sleep difficulties. And I am well aware now of what it looks like at 4 in the morning, not because I had to go to the hospital, but just because I'm awake, trying to figure out what to do. There are weird things on the television at 4 in the morning. And part of it is actually, I think, continuing to learn something new. Now, that takes a bit of motivation, but I think it's pretty easy for all of us to know that there are new things to learn. And all of your audience today has learned how to be on a digital webinar. Some of our telehealth things are now on digital, where people are learning how to connect by Zoom. There are other things, mind games like you were playing at the beginning here, Sudoku, crosswords. I'm going to mention Jeopardy only because it was so dear to so many people, because the leader had just died. But Alex Trebek brought new information and staying engaged into many people's living rooms. There are lots of ways of doing it. And whether that's sitting down to play Scrabble with a family member or playing chess online with somebody halfway around the world, or learning a new language or learning a new instrument, it's the business of actually continuing to engage that I think is really important. And I can't imagine somebody couldn't come up with at least one new thing that they wanted to learn. Now, if we're talking about aging with dementia, learning new things is hard. And in fact, is something that people have to be very careful that they're not pushing other people. It's what you're doing for yourself, not what you're doing for others or with others. So all of these things sort of have to apply to yourself as an individual. And then if you're lucky, practice them with your friends and your family.
Thank you very much.
I have one last comment, partly for the organizers and partly for the others. You will have noticed that I described what was on my slides. I am so happy to see an ASL interpreter. And I would encourage you to make sure that if you have visually impaired people on the line, that you do the same. Describe what you're showing so that they can too participate in this way of staying connected. Best wishes.
Thanks, Dr. Paton. I love how you're interweaving stories through all of your talk. It'll make it memorable for us. Thank you so much. Really appreciated you today. So now we're going to take a little 5-minute break. Thanks, bye-bye. We'll take a 5-minute break, so stretch our legs, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. There we go. Great. Thanks so much, Christine. Yeah. So, well, welcome back, everyone, from your break. So this afternoon, we have Dr. Glenn Landry going to be our guest speaker. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Glenn Landry. Hi, Dr. Landry.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Dr. Landry has studied circadian rhythms and sleep for over 20 years. He's completed his graduate research at Simon Fraser, and he then focused his research efforts on sleep and aging and cognition as a CIHR postdoctoral fellow in Dr. Teresa Louis Ambrose's Aging, Mobility, and Cognitive Neuroscience Lab at UBC.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone, and hopefully you can hear me. So yes, it's my pleasure today to get a chance to speak with you about sleep health and COVID-19, and also to talk about sleep and aging, and to sort of give you a sense of just how important it is to get the sleep we need, why it's so important, and hopefully to give you some tips at the end on how to address your sleep health. So without further ado, the first thing I want to communicate is that healthy sleep can combat COVID-19. And so I'm going to take you through some science. So bear with me a little bit here while I take you through some science, just to hammer home that it really is important for us to get the sleep we need here. So when we're looking at a pandemic such as COVID-19, one of the things when we're modeling the pandemic, there's really three factors that we want to look at. The first is something called reproduction rate, and that's just simply the speed with which the virus spreads throughout a population. And that's really something that we want to reduce, right? We want to decrease the reproduction rate within the population. And so in order to do that, we have to understand a couple other factors. One of them is transmission rate, and that's the ease with which the disease spreads throughout a population. And so there are two main factors that drive transmission rate. One of the factors is the risk of infection, and another factor is contact rate. And so I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing about COVID-19 at this point, but we're going into the second wave now of COVID-19, and so we really need to address these factors. So contact rate is simply something, the number of people that you're in contact with, and then risk of infection is just how likely you are to get that infection if you're exposed. The other factor that I want to talk about briefly is recovery rate, and that's the speed with which people either recover from the disease and get healthy again, or unfortunately pass. And so that recovery rate is a key factor in the reproduction rate. And so I'm going to explain this to you here. So remember, reproduction rate is what we want to address when combating a pandemic such as COVID-19. So that's reproduction rate. And there are two factors again, transmission rate and recovery rate. And so remember, our goal is to reduce the reproduction rate of COVID-19, for example. And we have two things we can do. We can try to first decrease the transmission rate, and at the same time, we can also try to increase the rate of recovery, or the recovery rate. Now, the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because sleep health actually plays a role in both transmission rate and recovery rate. We can, in fact, decrease the transmission rate by improving our sleep health, and we can increase our recovery rate by increasing our sleep health as well. So the objective here again is to reduce the reproduction rate by improving our sleep health. So when we look at that again, what we're addressing here first is transmission rate. And there's two factors. There's risk of infection and contact rate. Now, a lot of the focus so far, in my opinion, has been on contact rate. Think of it as the physical distancing measures that we've employed around the world and also here in BC. But also social distancing, but also personal protective equipment. Think masks and things like that. So that's addressing the contact rate, and that's an important factor. But there's the other side of the equation that I think we're missing an opportunity on, and that is decreasing the risk of infection by improving our sleep health. Okay, and so I'm going to show you very quickly a study that, now everything that I present here is consensus science, so this is agreed upon among sleep experts around the world. So I'm not presenting any contentious science or anything that hasn't been well established in the scientific literature. But just to give you one example here, this was a study that was done with college students, and these students volunteered to participate in the study. And so in this study, what happened is they were actually deliberately exposed to the common cold. So what they were given as a nasal spray that resulted in them actually being 100% exposed to the common cold. This is called the rhinovirus, different than coronavirus, obviously, but the mechanisms here are all the same. And so the individuals were exposed to this common cold, and then what they tracked after the exposure was what percent of those students or those participants actually got the common cold. So they're exposed to the virus, but not everyone gets the cold. Some of them are able to fight it off without getting the cold, and others actually get the cold. And what's really interesting about this study is before these participants were exposed to the cold, the common cold, they tracked their sleep health. And what they did is they used something called actigraphy to measure their sleep the week to 2 weeks in advance of being exposed to this common cold. And the important thing that we see here is that individuals that got better sleep, more sleep in advance of being exposed to the virus, they actually were less likely to get the cold. Okay, and so what I'm showing you here is that your sleep in advance to your exposure to a virus. So in this example, it's the common cold, but again, the mechanisms would be exactly the same for the COVID-19 virus. And so what we see is that sleep in advance of exposure plays a key role in determining your risk of actually getting the virus. And so there's two things I want you to notice in particular. So this first comparison here is looking at individuals that get greater than 7 hours of actual sleep versus people that are getting in the neighborhood of 6 to 7. So about an hour short of what we really recommend. So sleep experts around the world now have agreed that the science is very clear. The recommendation is that everyone get at least 7 hours of actual sleep every night to promote health and wellness. And so what we see here is that if we were to take individuals and get them from 6 hours to 7 hours of actual sleep each night, we would see a 20% reduction in their risk of infection. Now, this is important because we know, looking at epidemiological studies around the world, we know that sleep is actually the first thing that people sacrifice to meet the growing demands of work, family, and social life balance. And so in the general population, it's reasonable estimate that people are getting less than 7 hours actual. On average, something in the neighborhood of about 6.5 hours sleep is what most people are getting right now. This is far less than what we used to get. And so it's a function of many things, including technology and electronics at night and changing schedules and all of these things. There's another group that I want to show you, and that is the older adult sleep population, which is actually the same as shift workers. On average, older adults are getting much less sleep, and shift workers as well are getting much less sleep. We could say somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 hours each night. And so when we look at that population, older adults, for example, or shift workers, if we were to improve their sleep health and get them to go from getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 hours and instead get them an additional 2 hours so that they were up to the 7 to 8 range or greater than 7 hours sleep, we could see a 30% reduction in their risk of infection. And this matters. That's the transmission rate part of the equation. But we also know that if someone is unfortunate enough to actually get the virus and end up with, say, a common cold, or in this case, COVID-19, if you get it, the people that get the most sleep, the better sleep, they're actually able to recover faster. And this is also consensus science. We know that there's a number of mechanisms. Think of our immune response to challenges such as a virus. Things like neutrophils, natural killer cells, inflammatory mechanisms, antibodies. All of these are improved by getting better sleep. And so our recovery rate is improved when we get better sleep. So what I'm really trying to convince you of here is that sleep health matters when we're talking about the challenges that the world now faces in terms of COVID-19. We can, in fact, and we need to promote healthy sleep to combat COVID-19. We know that the world is facing this challenge, and right now a lot of the efforts to combat COVID-19 are focused on PPE, and so think masks, and also social distancing or physical distancing measures. And in the future, in the near future, hopefully within the next few months, say, let's say February, March, or the early expectations for when a vaccine would be available. That's another measure. But even in that case, one thing that I haven't put in the slides here, but we know from previous science that our immune system's response to a vaccine is actually enhanced when we get better sleep. So not only can we decrease transmission rate and increase recovery rate, but when we have a vaccine available for COVID-19, if we get better sleep, we can actually improve the efficacy of those vaccines. We've known this for other vaccines. Okay, so my main point here is that in addition to addressing the risk factors and using masks and social distancing and these factors, we should really also be including sleep hygiene and sleep health as a factor to combat COVID-19. Now, why am I bringing this to you today? Well, one of the factors is that we know in the older adult population that poor sleep is a common factor. In fact, it's a normal course of aging that sleep would change as we get older. I'm going to show you a chart here that gives you a good idea of what we currently accept as the normal course of aging in terms of sleep health. So what you're looking at here is an actogram. Think research grade Fitbit, but each horizontal row here is a 24-hour day. And so the black vertical lines that you see, that's the activity or the motion that is being captured by this actograph, this sleep recorder. And so the individual wears this actograph 24/7 for a period of about 2 weeks. In this case, you've got 14 days of recordings. And the pink shaded area, that's the time, we call that the sleep window. That's the time when the individual is actually trying to sleep. Now, key point, this is when the person is trying to sleep, but it isn't necessarily that they are able to sleep. So they're trying to sleep, but in many cases, the individual is unable to sleep. And we see that in this chart. Now, key point here, the actograph gives us EEG equivalent estimates of the amount of time the person is sleeping. So that's sleep duration. So in this, the average over the 2-week window, the individual was getting just over 6 hours of sleep. Remember, I was saying that older adults get less sleep on average. The sleep efficiency, that's just a term for the percent of time that the person is actually sleeping for the amount of time that they are trying to sleep. And you can see that this individual, and this is a reasonable example for older adult sleep. Again, you can see their sleep efficiency is about 75%. And so what that means is the person's getting less than 6.5 hours sleep, just over 6 hours. Their sleep efficiency is less than 80%, and their fragmentation, that's just the frequency of sleep disruption. So you can see these black vertical deflections here. That's the person not being able to sleep. So they're disrupted, they're tossing and turning or getting up. They're unable to sleep during this time. Now, here's an interesting point about these charts. When we look at older adult sleep and we talk about the normal changes, there's a few things. Number one, we see that older adults get less sleep than they did earlier in their lives and compared to the general population. We see that their sleep is more fragmented, meaning there's more disruption throughout the night. And we see that the main issue, the main complaint for older adults is an inability to sustain sleep throughout the night. Generally speaking, they're able to fall asleep, but the difficulty they have is that they can't sustain that sleep. And so if I take this sleep window for this example, and I break it into 2 halves, and I'm just going to toggle this for a moment, but when you break that sleep into 2 halves, what you see is that the sleep disruption is mainly in the back half of the sleep window. This is an inability to sustain the sleep. And so this is what we would call normal changes as a function of getting older in sleep health. So normal age-related sleep changes. Now, the important thing here is that normal doesn't mean healthy. In this case, we really want to address this sleep health because it's shortening the amount of sleep that the person is getting. And the good news is there are, in fact, things that we can do. And so stay tuned and I'll give you more information about that. But these changes that I'm showing you here, they result in health hazards. We know that the less sleep an individual gets, the greater their risk of common age-related disease, such as cardiovascular disease, inflammation, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and also dementia. And now these are well established in the literature, and we now know a lot of the mechanisms that sleep is driving increased risk. So we understand these, and I'm going to show you one of them in terms of something that is of interest to many people, and that is dementia or Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia. And so I'm going to show you this in terms of a sleep mechanism and what sleep is doing in terms of brain health. Okay, and so what you're looking at here is sleep need. And so on the bottom here, this is hours of wakefulness. And so when the person wakes up, what they're really doing is the longer the person is awake, they're building up a sleep need. Now, why is that? It's because the brain is like an engine. And when an engine's running, it produces exhaust. And in the same way, our brain produces exhaust while we're active and awake during the day. And that is actually producing a sleep need. In other words, this toxic waste is accumulating in our brain. But have no fear, because we have a mechanism that's designed to quite literally wash away that toxicity. And that's one of the functions. Now, sleep does a lot of things, but one of the functions that sleep does is that it washes away that toxicity that builds up in the brain. Now, as long as you get the sleep you need, and again, just to be clear, the recommendation is that people get at least 7 to 8 hours of actual sleep each night. And if you do that, you end up waking up with a fully refreshed, clean brain, if you will. And so then you start your day anew with that well-washed brain. However, if you don't get that sleep you need, then you end up accumulating a sleep debt. And over time, that accumulation builds toxicity in our brain. So I'm going to show you this here. Imagine these are neurons and they're active. And through the course of the day, they're building up this toxicity around the neurons as a function of normal activity. Now, if we get the sleep we need, again, then we wake up the next day and we've got this clean brain. However, if instead of getting the 7 hours of sleep that we need, let's imagine for a moment that we only get 6. Well, then what happens is we wake up the next day with an accumulation of toxicity. And so what you'll see here, this is the side of the brain that we're looking at, and right here is the frontal cortex. And so what I'm just depicting here so that you can visualize it, is that this sleep debt is this accumulation of toxicity that didn't get washed away because we didn't get enough sleep. And if we continue down that path and each night only getting 6 hours, let's say, then over time we accumulate this toxicity. It's like a tsunami, a wave of toxicity that moves its way through the brain. Now, what does that result in? Well, we know that in terms of Alzheimer's disease, one of the toxic components is the beta amyloid plaques, and you can see them right here. These are plaques that accumulate around the neurons, and they effectively choke off the neurons. So that's essentially what happens in Alzheimer's disease. That's one of the mechanisms. It's not the whole story, but it is one of the mechanisms that's well established. And so these neurons end up getting choked, and then they're not communicating well in the system or the network of other neurons. And then the brain gets a signal that says this neuron isn't playing well with others. You see them with the arrows here. And so the brain actually gets the signal to remove those neurons. And so that's a process called apoptosis, but the neurons get removed. And what you end up with is quite literally a hole in the brain. And that's not a problem if we're talking about one neuron, but when we're talking system-wide and there's many, many neurons that are affected, then you end up with this process, and you ultimately end up with Alzheimer's disease. So the takeaway message here that I want you to understand is that sleep health is critical to brain health. So I don't have to hopefully convince you that sleep's important now. And for most of us, as we get older, we become aware that we're not getting as much sleep. And it's not a function of the individual not wanting to get more sleep. It's just that they aren't able to get that sleep. And they get to a point where they wake up and they're not able to get back to sleep, and they think to themselves, well, I guess I've had enough sleep, and then they begin their day. We heard that with the previous speaker when she was talking about knowing what it's like at 4 in the morning, because they wake up at 4 and can't get back to sleep. And also mentioned, she also mentioned that, you know, she knows what programs are on at 4 in the morning because she's up and watching TV. So it turns out that there's a lot of things that we can do to actually improve our sleep as we get older. Okay, so the key message, again, just to review, is that age-related changes in sleep are a normal course of aging. Shortened sleep windows, waking up more often, and having difficulty getting back to sleep. These are all very normal things. The second thing I want to communicate is that while these changes are indeed normal, they need not be inevitable. There are, in fact, things that we can do to improve our sleep health, and the key to that is understanding circadian rhythms. So what are circadian rhythms? Circadian rhythms are daily biological rhythms. What I want you to think of is we have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, and we have nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. The problem that we have as we get older is that we become like a shift worker, if you will, where we turn our nights into days and our days into nights. Shift workers have to work at night, and so as a function of their work schedule, they turn their nights into days and their days into nights. But as older adults, what happens is we go to bed, we sleep for about 4 hours, and then we wake up, and we aren't able to get back to sleep, and so we do things like watching TV, the previous speaker mentioned, or we get up and we start our day. We might think of this as a normal thing. Well, I guess I'm an early bird now, and I just like the early mornings. But the truth is that that activity, what you do when you can't sleep, matters, because you're telling your brain that this is a time to be awake. And so as you progress and you continue to reinforce this mechanism, you'll find it harder and harder to sustain sleep at night. So think of it as this vicious cycle. It starts as something very innocent at first, where you have a little bit of difficulty, and then over time, those difficulties increase, that then result in a rapidly, or I shouldn't say rapidly, but they result in a growing deficit in terms of your sleep health. So how do we change that? What do we do? Well, it turns out that time cues matter. And what I mean by time cues is we have this, think of it as a conductor that is the pacemaker that sets our circadian rhythms. It tells our circadian rhythms, this is day and this is night. During the day, this is the set of physiological functions that need to happen. And during the night, it's a whole different set of physiological functions. And the issue is that these are incompatible processes. They need to be kept separate by time. So again, daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. And we need to tell our clock, our pacemaker, what time it is. Okay, and so how do you do that? Well, we evolved as hunter-gatherers around the plains, and our days were exposed to a lot of sunlight, lots of sunlight during the day, but at night we didn't get light. In fact, we had much less light that we now have because we have artificial sources of light, and we've got electronics and all of these things that actually bring the light into our night. And when we are getting that light at night, we are actually telling our pacemaker, our time cue, that night is actually day. So that's one of the things, is that we need to be very clear that light is a daytime signal and darkness is a nighttime signal. Now, I realize I'm pummeling you with information here and we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to give you some keys. And I'll also provide my email address at the end. So if you have questions, I'll answer questions, but if you want to contact me directly, you'll be able to by email. So light is a fundamental factor. Another is meal times. And this is another dramatic change from what we evolved. We evolved again as hunter-gatherers, and it took a lot of effort and energy for us to get the resources and the food that we needed, hunting and gathering to get our food. And we would eat during the day, and our eating was done, think of it as for metabolic need. But now we have food at our disposal. We have access to food 24/7 if we choose. And very often people will get up at night and they'll think, oh, I need to have something to eat to help me get back to sleep. Eating food is a daytime signal. Fasting, or the absence of food, is a nighttime signal. And one of the mistakes we make as a society now is that we have a tendency to eat our biggest meal a few hours before bedtime. We're busy, we live busy lives, and so often that dinner meal, our biggest meal of the day, is actually just a couple of hours before we go to bed. And what that does is it gives our brain the daytime signal right before we're supposed to be going to sleep. And in fact, we're digesting food, and that alters our sleep chemistry. It changes the way our brain is able to get the sleep it needs. And so we really need to separate eating food from our nighttime sleeping. And so a key message here is that you need to eat meals in the early part of the day and then be finished eating about 4 to 5 hours before your bedtime, giving yourself a long fast. Think of that. You go to bed, you've finished eating about 4 to 5 hours before you went to bed, and then you sleep for your hopefully 8-hour sleep window, giving yourself a long fast, meaning a long period of time without food. That's a strong signal for your brain that says this is nighttime. Eating food, daytime. Fasting is nighttime. And then finally, physical activity. We've become much more sedentary as a society than we were and what we evolved to be. During the day, that's a time for lots of activity. And I want to distinguish exercise from physical activity. And in particular, I want to talk about physical activity as just being active. And the opposite of that is sedentary time. Time when we're sitting down, not active, watching TV, reading, doing work, whatever that might be. That's sedentary time. Now, in our lives, a lot of us have a great deal of sedentary time during the day. And that is providing the wrong signal to our brains that this is day. So physical activity, or breaking up the sedentary time, is a key part of providing your brain with the signal that this is day. And the rule of thumb that I want you to use is break up sedentary time every 30 to 60 minutes. So if you've been sitting down for 30 to 60 minutes, you want to break that up. And it doesn't mean you have to get on a treadmill and work really hard or do anything like that. It's just getting up, do a lap around your house, just get your blood flowing a little bit for a couple of minutes. We're not talking about sustained activity necessarily, although being active obviously and getting exercise is key. I'm just talking about here breaking up the sedentary time. What you want then, just to summarize, is to provide your brain with lots of cues that this is day. And the daytime cues, to summarize again, are lots of UV protected sunlight, food, meal times, regular meal times. And a good rule of thumb that I didn't mention is to have your biggest meal of the day as your breakfast. Think breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. And forgive the gender bias there. Big meal to start your day, and then progressively smaller meals as you get through the day, and a big gap, 4 to 5 hours before going to bed. And then finally, the other daytime signal is decreasing sedentary time, being active throughout the day and not being sedentary for longer than 30 to 60 minutes. And then the final piece of this is that you need to be consistent. Routine sleep windows are absolutely critical. You want to tell your body that this is bedtime and be routine with that, because your brain and your body learn to anticipate the sleep window. Think of it this way. If you build the sleep window, over time, sleep will fill that sleep window as long as you're consistent with it. So you want to build your sleep window, protect the sleep window, and sleep will fill it. The key message being that you want to avoid light at night, you want to avoid food at night, and you want to be sedentary at nighttime. So getting up, the final message, what you do when you can't sleep matters. So if you are getting up and watching TV or getting up and making food and doing things like that, it will actually impair your ability to get sleep at that time in the future. Remember that what you do when you can't sleep matters. The final piece is here. It's possible for you to actually, we have the technology now, it's possible for you to actually objectively measure your sleep. You can get something like the Fitbit and get yourself a Fitbit. They're not that expensive anymore, and they measure sleep stages. Again, this is Fitbit data, aggregate data. It's been measured with millions of users around the world, and you can see here that the average sleep as of this publishing was 6 hours and 38 minutes. This is average data for all users, okay? And we can see that as a society, we're just not getting enough sleep. This is what I call elite sleep. This is the data that you would be able to get if you got yourself a Fitbit. Key point here is that you can see, full disclosure, this is my sleep data, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you that, I work very hard to make sure I get good sleep. And so you can see here that I get deep sleep. As soon as I fall asleep, I'm able to get into the deep sleep. That's the sleep that washes the brain. And then I'm cycling through from deep into REM sleep. This here is REM. And you'll see that these cycles, they happen every 90 minutes or so. You'll be able to see that it's not just how many hours you've spent sleeping that matters, but it's the structure or the architecture, the sleep architecture, how that sleep is made up. And you'll be able to track that if you get yourself a Fitbit. And so to give you a sense of just a bit of hope here, it is entirely possible to improve your sleep health. And this is tracking your sleep health over time, doing the things that I've talked about. And if you want additional help, I'm here for you. But what you can see, this is just an example of a client of mine who came to me. This is an older adult. And he was having difficulty being able to sustain sleep. He was aware that he was, having greater and greater difficulty being able to stay asleep, and would find himself getting up at about 4 or 5. And he wanted to be able to get back to sleep, but he couldn't. And over the course of working with me, now this is 6 to 8 weeks here, going through a program with me, you can see that he actually improves his sleep. And actually, if we zero in here, you can see the dark blue on the bottom here. This is deep sleep. That's the sleep that washes the brain. You can see a dramatic improvement in the deep sleep, but you can also see that his REM sleep numbers improved as well. And REM sleep is really important for consolidation of learning and memory. What you can see overall, the sleep has improved, and we're getting to the 8 hours that we would like to see. But not only that, the structure and the architecture of the sleep is improved as well. So it is possible to get the sleep you need, even though you're getting older and that you're experiencing these normal age-related changes. We're going to make this available for recording, so you'll see the references for the science. And now I'll open it up to any questions. You can see my email address here as well. It's just simply glenn@elitesleep.ca. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm just going to see if Barbara's tech is resolved here, and then we'll go to questions.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Landry. Can you hear me, Christine?
Yes, you're all good now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Dr. Landry, that was really, I think my favorite part of that was the part that said, when you said we can help our sleep problems, that made me so happy. I feel like that is, I feel elated. So I'm sure there's some people in the audience who may have had the same experience, that feeling that lack of sleep, or as you said, an exhausted brain. That was really a wonderful explanation. Thank you so much for helping us learn more about healthy sleep. So now I think it would be great if everyone ask their questions and put questions in the chat box, and also as Christina said, you can put your put the little hand up signal as well.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay, I have a question about using audiobooks to fall asleep. Something, if you think that's a good thing to keep practicing, or where you should try and wean yourself off that. I find I use this and it works very well, but I'm wondering about it becoming too much of a habit.
So that's an awesome question. Thank you for asking. So let's put audiobooks and music and all of these different things. Let's call them different strategies as a sleep routine. And so to answer your question, the simple answer is that they can be helpful, but they can also be harmful. And so we have to really think about how we're using these strategies. So if you're using, the key message here is that whatever strategy you use as part of your sleep routine, it should be something that is helping you transition, prepare your brain to go from wakefulness to sleep. And so the key thing there is that it needs to be something that's relaxing, that calms you, and that gets you into that mindset of this is the time for sleep. And so the audiobook, if it's something that's really engaging you and you're thinking about it and you're trying to learn or process it, well, that would be the opposite of what you really want it to be. It's making you think more than think less. And the other part of it that I would say to consider is that if your brain and your body are actually prepared for sleep at the time that you've scheduled this, then it should take you about less than 15 minutes, usually 5 to 10 minutes to fall asleep. And so if you're using an audiobook or if you're using music or something like that, it really should be something timed to turn off. Because when we fall asleep, we go through different stages. There was a lot of information to try to share and not a lot of time. But as we go through these stages, our arousal threshold changes. And so if you fall asleep and then you come back up into a period where you would actually be aware of the audiobook, that can be disruptive to your sleep. So my long-winded answer is that you need to be careful about how you use these strategies. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, our next question is from, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, so my apologies, Suat.
I have a question because the genetologists, I've seen before, two of them, they said, you get up and wake up at the same time. And if you can't get up middle of the night because of senior, your bladder doesn't cooperate. So you get up, you can't go back to sleep. And and they said, if you can't go back to sleep half an hour, you get up. Bed is only for sleep.
Right.
So what kind of thing we should do when we awake?
Yeah,
so that's go back to sleep.
There's really two questions there. If I could sort of just unpack that a little bit. There's the issue of sleep hygienists who will quite rightly say that if you're dealing with insomnia, where this is not an age-related component for a moment, but just a person that has difficulty getting to sleep or falling asleep or staying asleep. And so their mind isn't ready for sleep, let's say, as an example. In that example, what sleep hygienists would say is that you shouldn't lay awake in bed, tossing and turning for, let's say, more than 15 to 30 minutes. And that what you should do, because your bed is meant for sleep and you're supposed to prepare yourself mentally for that, that you should get out of bed. Now, I don't have the time now to get into it in too much depth, but circadian rhythms, or in this case, think of it as daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. And if your insomnia is due to circadian dysregulation, so that your brain is not able to know this is day and this is night, if that's an issue, then there's a different factor going on beyond just simple sleep hygiene. So what I would say is that, to answer your question, first thing is, if you aren't able to sleep, then you should try the things that I'm talking about in terms of working on promoting strong circadian regulation. That's managing your light exposure profile, getting light during the day, sunlight, UV protected sunlight during the day, avoiding light at night, managing your meal times so that the bulk of your meals are eaten in the early parts of the day, the morning and the afternoon, and a small meal in the evening, having a long fast at night, that's the nighttime signal, and then also managing your physical activity profile and decreasing sedentary time during the day, and then not being active at night. So what you do when you can't sleep absolutely matters, and I would not recommend getting up and watching TV or getting on your computer and answering email and doing things like that. So what I'm talking about is promoting strong circadian regulation. The final piece of that question is just about having to get up to go to the bathroom, for example. And this is quite common in older adults, right? The older we get, the more often we may have to get up to go to the bathroom. Let me just give you this bit of information. If you find that you're having to get up to go pee 3 or more times a night, please see your physician, your GP, and ask to get screened for something called sleep apnea. Okay, that's one piece. Now, if you're just getting up once or twice a night to go to the bathroom, that might be a different issue. But one thing I can tell you, again, I know this is a complex answer, but when we look at circadian rhythms, one of the functions is when we have strong circadian regulation, that is strong understanding that our brain is, this is day and this is night. When that's really strong, at night, our bladder capacity increases so that we can hold more urine. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the concentration of the urine is much higher concentration at night, so that we end up having less urine production in terms of volume into a larger capacity that we can hold, so that we can make it through the night. And then during the day, we can pass that. Now, the key point here is that by promoting stronger regulation, you can actually enhance your ability to make it through the night without having to go to the bathroom. So that's one separate answer on that. Hopefully that answered your question. Long-winded as though it might be.
Thank you. We're going to go to the chat now, and Sue Eng asks, do afternoon naps make up for having less than 7 hours of sleep at night?
That's an awesome question as well. Great job. Okay, so here's another distinction between sleep hygienists and circadian rhythms and sleep physiology. So naps. Sleep hygienists would tell you, naps will take away from your nighttime sleep. And so there was a time, now this is changing, but 5-10 years ago, people would say, well, if you're having problems sleeping at night, then you shouldn't be napping during the day. Let me be clear that the science, we now know that naps are actually good for adults. In fact, older adults who nap during the day actually have better cognitive health than older adults that don't. However, having said that, let's be clear what a nap is. So one of the things we should really consider is this notion. We all know that there's things that are good for us and things that we shouldn't do. Many of us know that we need to eat healthy, exercise, and get lots of sleep. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it's not just what you do that matters, but it's also when you do it that matters as much or more. And so to give you an example here in terms of napping, we have a circadian rhythm, a daily biological rhythm, and during the afternoon, we have a pre-programmed nap time. And this is that afternoon lull. If you think of, for many people, it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 p.m., the afternoon period. And that's a period where you'll see the head nod. And for a lot of people, they're trying to make it through that crash. And so they'll be drinking coffee and things like that, stimulants to try to make it through that afternoon lull. Well, that's actually going against our physiology. We are programmed to have a nap at that time of day. So a good healthy nap is properly timed during the afternoon lull. And also, it's not more than about 45 minutes to 60 minutes. The idea is to have a nap, not a daytime sleep. So anything longer than 90 minutes, and that's not really a nap, you're sleeping during the day, which would actually take away from your nighttime sleep. So naps are great. They need to be properly timed during the afternoon lull, think 2 to 5 p.m., and they need to be properly, the proper duration of, let's say the sweet spot, something in the neighborhood of 45 minutes to an hour. So, and another message, it's not several naps throughout the day, right? It's not a morning nap and then an after lunch nap and then an after dinner nap. Those would definitely take away from your nighttime sleep. So a single nap properly timed of the right duration.
We have another question, and that is, if using audio to help go back to sleep, is there a difference for the brain between using earbuds and versus an external radio or recorder?
The difference, I would think the most important difference there is comfort. So I've worked with many adults, and many of them use the in-ear earbuds, if you will. And so as long as they're comfortable, you should be fine. But the problem is when you're moving around, they can be disruptive. And so if you move from one side to the other on the pillow, and if it digs into your ear and that disrupts you, that could certainly be an issue. But the overarching message that I would want, if you are in fact using these audio cues to get you back to sleep, make sure that you're not illuminating your room with, say, the iPad or the iPhone or whatever device that you're using for that music. And also, please try to do your best to make sure that you're not having to get up and go and get this device. Like, those are definitely going to be disrupting you. So key message, light, activity, those two things, and food. Those are the three major no-nos. So you don't want to be using that device and then it resulting in you having to be more active or getting more light. And then the final thing, just to repeat, is you want to make sure that it's a short enough duration that it's just long enough for you to fall asleep, but then it's off, so that when you then come back to a level of lighter sleep when you are more aware of your environment, that it's not disrupting your sleep.
Thank you. Now we have a question. What about taking melatonin? And a comment, very interesting presentation. I'm seeing a few of those.
Thank you for that. So the melatonin question is an absolutely critical question for older adults. So we know that melatonin, let's be clear, melatonin is a hormone that prepares the brain and body for sleep. It does so many things, but one of the things that it does is it begins rising a couple of hours before your normal bedtime, as long as you are not getting bright light or blue light in particular, because that turns off melatonin. So we naturally produce melatonin. Melatonin is also a hormone that is a signal for our brain, that it's actually a light signal, that it tells us when melatonin is off, it tells us this is day. And when melatonin is ramping up, it tells us this is the transition to night. So it's absolutely critical. It also plays a role in the identification and removal of cancer cells. So it's a very important hormone. So should not be a surprise that a lot of people would think that, well, if melatonin is so important, then we should probably take it. Now here's the problem. And this is I teach a whole course on this kind of material, so you have to bear with me here. But the key thing is that for most older adults, if they were to take melatonin to help them get a better sleep, the time that they would take it is just before bedtime. And the problem with that is that it can actually help you fall asleep. What it does, if you take melatonin, remember I said it's not just what you do that matters, but when you do it that matters as much or more? Well, if you take melatonin just before bed, you're actually sending your brain a signal, and it causes your circadian rhythms to advance. And so what happens is you'll fall asleep faster, but you'll also wake up earlier. So if you think back to that chart that I was showing you, what it's going to do, and just bear with me here as I try to show you this chart, for most older adults, falling asleep isn't the problem. It's staying asleep that is the problem. And so here in this chart, you can see that what happens if we take melatonin right here just before we go to bed, it's going to help us fall asleep, but it's going to cause us to advance our circadian rhythms. It causes us, think of it this way, as it's like jet travel overnight while we're sleeping. And so it causes us to wake up at an earlier time zone. And so it actually takes an existing problem for older adults and makes it worse. So my answer to you is that taking melatonin before bedtime, if you're an older adult who's trying to get a better night's sleep, it is the absolute wrong thing to be doing. Instead, what you want to do is focus on being more active during the day, getting more sunlight, UV protected sunlight during the day, and that will actually enhance your natural production of melatonin at the right time. And it'll result in a higher amplitude of melatonin naturally, we call that endogenously. It'll have higher levels for a longer period of time, and you'll end up with a better sleep. So these things that I'm telling you, I'd love to be able to just give you a pill. But the truth is that there is no pill that's going to actually get you the sleep you need, which in anticipation of some questions about sleep aids, like Zopiclone and things like this, we now know in the science that sleep aids, pill form sleep aids or natural supplements and things like this, they don't result in you necessarily getting the sleep you need. Think of it as a pharmacological sleep, but it isn't the proper staging of sleep that you need. So we need to move away from this mentality of taking a pill to get sleep and move toward getting back to what we evolved for. A strong signal of this is day and a strong signal of this is night, and keeping those two separate and being very routine about that.
So just thank you for that. I know that we're a few minutes over time here, and we did still have a few questions in the queue. So to those of you who didn't get your questions answered, if you don't mind writing them in the chat box, and we'll put those responses in the newsletter with the link that will come out in the next few days. And I'll turn it back to you, Barbara.
Thanks so much, Christine. Dr. Landry, that was so informative. I was encouraging, and you taught us so many things. I was really, really pleased to be listening today. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your information with us and sharing your email. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from some of us. So thanks all of you in the audience for joining us today at the virtual Dialogue on Aging presentation. And as Christine said, this recording will be posted and available to you later. So I just want to say, before I turn it over to Mary Lou, that the Alzheimer's Society of BC has been so pleased to be a partner with Providence Health for this series. And I thank every one of you for helping. And thank you so much for Waterfront Center for Communication Accessibility and all of the partners that have made this possible. We're really, really pleased about this whole event. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary Lou. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much, all of you. Just a final thank you, because this is the last of our program for this fall. Thank you very much, Glenn, for that exciting session. To Katherine Paton, if she happens to still be online. Thank you to all of the sponsors who helped make this possible, who helped Providence Healthcare continue with these series, and particularly to the Alzheimer's Society for partnering with us. So it's been a great opportunity for all of us to learn how to come together differently. And I would be amiss not to thank the crew that's always behind the scenes enabling this to happen. So thank you very much, Christine and Megan, for doing so much work behind the scenes. And that also is an extra thank you to our speakers who, with this new technology, there's lots of wonderful things about it, but it actually takes more prep time. So thank you, Glenn and Katherine, for making the time to come on early, to have that extra trial run, which is necessary. So thank you very much for that. And all of our participants for learning this new way to come together. And I would invite you to send via email or on the chat box today just any particular topics that you might be thinking about for the future that would be of interest to you. And we'll be thinking about the winter months and what might happen then. So thank you all, and best wishes, and do stay safe.
Thanks, Mary Lou. Bye.
Bye-bye.